Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our bi-weekly. No, not bi-weekly. That's wrong, isn't it?
Nope.
Fortnightly.
Yep.
Oh, it is right. Okay, fair enough. Good. I never know. That's why I always say fortnightly. Welcome to our fortnightly Azure live show, where we'll be doing sort of live coding and that kind of stuff. This episode, we're going to be building out the rest, or at least the next stage of our zero-touch continuous integration and continuous delivery pipeline in Azure DevOps for our Git Watcher project. Joining me, Liam Gulliver, as always, are my illustrious co-hosts, Pete Gallagher and Jonathan Rolfe.
Hello.
Hello.
So one thing I do want to do sort of address at the top of the show, and it's something that I wrote in our write-up of the last episode, is so we were doing a continuous integration pipeline for the for our function app. Now, it's great, and if I just go across to our hopefully our screen share, which this time shouldn't be blurry by default.
Looks good.
Good. So if we go to our pipelines, because just for everyone else's benefit as well, just as a reminder, obviously we're doing things to our Git Watcher, which you'll see do stuff at the bottom of the screen, as well as we make commits back. But the repo sits in GitHub rather than in Azure DevOps. But I'm going to make a change here in a second. But we basically, or rather, we've added it in now so that we have our feature slash. We didn't have that before. We'd just done straight to main, which means that all our builds would run only if we committed to main rather than any of our other branches, which kind of defeated the point of our continuous integration build. But we've also now got as well our conditions that we had from before, so it won't actually then run a .NET publish, and it won't run publishing artifacts to the staging directory. So in this episode, Jonathan, Pete, and I have been talking in the background, and I have suggested that our next port of call should probably be writing infrastructure as code so we can actually deploy into something. So because we've already got a project building, right?
Yeah.
And there's no point in trying to deploy into something if it doesn't exist, even though we have our Git Watcher that already does exist. We want to spin up new infra for this, and probably have at least a dev and a production environment. There has been some discussion in Slack between us of different advocation of approaches, let's say, in which it isn't decided yet, but we will soon find out over the course of the next few minutes that Jonathan is wrong and Terraform is the right way to go.
It's coming. Just because you have to be trendy.
Like, if we were being trendy, we'd be doing it in Bicep.
Well, true.
Yeah.
That's a kind of
Bicep is great. Bicep is really good. It's just not production ready. And we're trying to treat this as a real world example. And ARM is great, and we're going to have to do some ARM anyway if we go down the Terraform route. So I figured we could, in my opinion, whether or not it's right or wrong, spoiler, it's right. We should do the Terraform approach, so we get to touch on both options. And so in the chat, so Gary's asking why not do it in the command line, purely because then your infrastructure doesn't actually exist as code. So we could deploy it by doing AZ commands, and that's great, but it doesn't give us that kind of process and at the level of scrutiny that we would want around our infrastructure. So we could say open up a pull request.
Yeah, it becomes a manual process then. If you're using the AZ command line, then you aren't automating the release or publishing of it. So it's technically possible while you're spiking, but yeah, we wouldn't. We're trying to demonstrate as Liam said at the stop, this is a zero-touch approach where we can compile some code on we check it in and the pipeline takes care of it.
Yeah, exactly. And from what Johnny Shea is saying in the chat, even though I'm pretty sure it's meant to be on an open hack today for Microsoft, is it helps us to write it out in a way that it's also idempotent. So, regardless of it being Terraform or ARM, we're going to need to identify what we need ultimately.
Yep.
So this was interesting.
This was interesting in the sense that when I first started doing cloud-based stuff, I was making use of the tooling that's within Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, where they handily wrap things like a publish action for you. And what was I had to do the learning afterwards is to understand what it had done in my name, and that was more difficult to unpick. I mean, it was convenient to be able to just go and say publish to the cloud and select your subscription, and off it went. But you didn't get an understanding of what actually was hosting your kit. So it's interesting that we've got a couple of different types of resource that we need to deploy in GitWatcher to actually make it work. So it depends where we want to start in terms of CI/CD for that.
Yeah, and so I guess let's come to that in a minute, because my problem is I can't seem to think about all these things at once at the moment. So let's
one job at a time, please.
Yeah, one thing.
I know that when you're spinning stuff up in the Azure portal as well, handily, it will create you the infrastructure section of that for you as well, which is why I tend to like ARM templates, because that's what it's popping out there. So I'll be quite visually led. Yeah, exactly.
That's it's super useful, that, because you can actually get to see a little bit under the hood of what it could look like.
Yeah, and theoretically, you would hope at least that is going to pop out the way that they want you to be doing it, rather than our guesswork.
I would challenge, though, that there are times where its naming conventions aren't what I would do personally.
I don't know if you know about this as well, guys. I think it's so you don't have to go into the Azure portal to look at what you've got deployed as well. In terms of your what's it called? In terms of your ARM templates, you can actually go to the Resource Explorer directly and go to resources.azure.com, and you can see everything for your ARM templates by provider, subscription, all that kind of fun stuff in there.
Cool.
In fact, I can show you if I go to host and screen. So what is it? It's what one is it? It's Pete's one. And we can go into the subscriptions, and we can see that in the subs, if I go into resource groups, there is, in fact, our GitWatcher resource group already. I go into by providers, or I can look at the resources, and I can also edit it and push it up here as well if I wanted to. But if I drop it down by web, I can see our sites in here, because we've got function apps and that kind of thing. And now they've got a thing where you can also pull it out in Ansible as well.
Ooh.
Which is pretty nifty.
That's pretty cool. I didn't know anything about that. You should perhaps tweet that out.
Were you about to doodle something?
I was about to doodle something, which is also why I flipped to this screen. So basically, what we've got is I think we were talking about having a resource group per environment rather than per set of infra, I guess. Because I know some people like to put, say, all the function apps together and that kind of thing. But I like the resource group per one. Obviously, we're going to be doodling this on the whiteboard, so we're not going to use any kind of formal notation for it. But so we've got our resource group and our resource group.
Why would you use the other method of combining all your like resources together? What's the thought process behind that?
I don't know.
I wouldn't, and I tend to use resource groups for project boundaries anyway, in that sense of collecting resources together. I think if you look at the Azure naming convention document, I think there's some good advice there. I would lean on for naming, but in terms of grouping, I find things like if you're going to use shared resources like application insights or log analytics workspaces, it kind of makes sense that functional pieces are next to each other. I'm not a fan of sticking only one type of resource in a resource group personally.
No, but you're talking about the individual ARM templates that spin up the resources there, aren't you? where you'd have an ARM template that just spins up Azure Functions and another one that just spins up blah, blah, blah. I find that a bit odd. I suppose it just depends on how you're going to spin your resources up and why.
I guess it depends on your business too, in terms of how they want to break things down. Like for me, I like having a template that says, here is here is my environment, and everything I need to run this sits in that one. I might have a shared resource group at some point as well for any shared components, but other than that, that's kind of it. So Gary's asked the question in the chat of, doesn't the resource group ensure that all resources are close together in the data center? In short, no, I guess, in my experience, because you can set your resource group to be, let's say your location for your resource group is in West Europe. There's still nothing to stop you from deploying something into that resource group that's then in UK South. Yeah, I think I can't remember if it helps with the defaults or not. Jonathan, you might remember because you've done stuff more recently than I have.
Defaults of what? Sorry.
The location of a resource. So if you deploy resource into a resource group.
Yeah, I mean, your resource will always be in an availability zone, in the sense of, like, I'm assuming your UKS on the screen is a nod to UK South. So in that sense,
yes, I'll explain that in a sec.
In terms of, I'm gonna counter your naming convention in a minute, but yeah, that's fine. But yeah, in sense that your resource group, it makes sense to actually have an indication on your resource group of where it's actually physically deployed, because an awful lot you will specify that when you spin up the resource group is, I want this location, and you pick that actively. So therefore, the name does. I find it's helpful to actually have that in the name.
Yes. Okay, so let's go on, Pete.
I'm just my webcam's going a bit funny, so I'm going to unplug it and plug it back in. So if I disappear, you can carry on. I'm still here.
Okay. You look fine on the stream.
Yeah, it's blinking for some reason, and I'm probably going to give somebody a funny turn.
It's going to give somebody a funny turn. Okay. Right. So naming conventions. So I default to all I've started doing whilst we're talking is I was writing down the way I name stuff. So I would go, here is my business unit. Here's my product. Here's my environment with some form of 3 or 4 letter shortcode. Location, same as well. And then what it is, like a shortcode for the resource. In this case, it's a resource group. But Jonathan, you have...
Yeah, so my alternative, which is based on, it's only because I've used, you've used this in client work and collaborated with a lot of engineers on this kind of stuff. So I bow to that experience, but I also find that I just leaned on the define your naming convention document on the architecture part of the Azure documentations thing, which suggests, for example, this would be RG as the resource type first, followed by, then it would be Git Watcher, and then its environment, so that's still the same, and then region, so that's UK South, and then I do tend to find that I just stick an identifier on the end just in case you do have more than one. So that's their suggestion. There's a suggested set of prefixes that they use for resources, and I find that that's handy because it sorts by resource type within the subscription, or so it's actually quite easy to find.
I mean, I guess it depends. So like, the subscription we're using will have a lot of different business unit type things in ultimately, because it'll be Pete doing stuff in it and so on. Whereas I find the identifier of business unit first, then product is easier to sort by. Whether or not that's true of your business, ultimately, doesn't matter.
Thanks.
Work with what makes sense for your business.
Yeah, as long as it's unique and it makes sense. There's no fixed. The only types that there are,
and it's documented is the other thing. Make sure that's
exactly.
simple.
The only time that there are restrictions is things like storage accounts where you can't use hyphens, and so there are some restrictions on some resource types that might mean if you don't go and look at that first, you might come up with a naming convention that then doesn't actually work in practice.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess in terms of naming convention, when we deploy our function app, it'll deploy a storage account as well. But I was thinking in terms of naming, just basically the same as the above, maybe with some
Yep,
less dashes
go with
in
yours.
and func in or fat.
Well, you see, that's for me. That's why the func would be at the front. So you do func-get-watcher for that and whatever else. But that's just me. I would normally stick that. You in your example, you would be putting that at the end.
Yes, yeah. Ultimately, like I guess from while the MS docs give you a steer, like say the thing that works well is when you have potentially multiple business units. In my opinion, if we were using this subscription for a single use case,
Yep,
I'd probably put it at the front.
Yep,
Yeah.
Understood.
So
let's go with your suggestion. It's fun.
What we need to do? So I mean, what do we want to write this in?
I am happy to go with either. I think ultimately the thing about infrastructure as code is that the biggest thing you're doing with infrastructure as code is breaking the problem down, and actually the syntax that you're writing in is less important. So I'm happy to take your Terraform experience, but you'll have to excuse me because I'm not as up to speed with it as you are.
You say I'm up to speed. I'm a little bit rusty. So
in the sense that I have the reason I went with ARM is that because I'm only deploying into Azure, therefore I didn't see the need to abstract. However, Liam's argument is that he finds the HCL is actually quite clean to read compared to ARM, and I do get that in the sense that the sort of JSON nature of it is verbose, and some people, as much as YAML can be also confusing, I think there is an argument to say that, for example, one of the ones that on templates I'm using at the moment is like 86 lines long just to deploy a function app. So, oh no, hang on, that's the parameters file. It's the actual definition. 276 lines long. So you could argue that, yeah, Terraform probably is a bit more terse and certainly used widely.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe Terraform is the right way to go here. For the purposes of the show, I'm super rusty. Pete's never done it. Jonathan's never done it. So what we'll do for the over the course of the rest of the show is we'll actually go into it from a let's start from scratch point of view. Let's talk about requirements that we'll need. We'll show you everything that we need to Google to get ourselves over the line, all that kind of stuff as well.
We could always do a future episode with it as a comparison with another approach.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Right.
Okay, so I have checked out or pulled down the latest changes into my. There we go. Sorry.
So our solution has a backend and the Blazor client. Which way are we going to start?
So it's going to make a new directory called infrastructure for originality. Infra. There we go. Then I guess we've got a couple of things. So we'll have two environments, which means we don't want to have what's it called? We don't want to have one file per environment. We want to have a parameters that we can pass through. So I guess the first thing is let's start at the basics and say we need to use a given provider because we're going to be using the Azure provider for this because we're deploying to Azure. But if, say, for whatever reason we wanted to use AWS, we could switch out the provider and you're effectively using the same syntax throughout. Obviously, on Azure Live, we do pretty much everything in Azure, but that's not to say that we wouldn't in the future. And I think, depending on the route that you're taking into your infrastructure as code way of working, and this is just kind of in my experience, like a lot like Pete and Jonathan, my original background is as a developer, and we've all started with ARM because it was easier to read going into, well, I'll just use JSON because I know what JSON is and that kind of thing. But if you're from a different background, like say ops, I think you might find Terraform a little bit easier because it's less verbose, I guess, in the text.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
So let me just find a quick example. So we're going to need to do two things first. Anyway. So Terraform for teaching Pete and Jonathan and sharing this information with everybody else, it works off of the idea of a state file. And I guess in the grand scheme of things, when it comes to ARM templates, you kind of still have a state that is stored as the thing that we're looking at earlier with resources and so on. But obviously that's not just out of the box with Terraform and everything else. So we have to store the Terraform state file somewhere, because if we don't, it'll basically think it's starting from scratch each time, and you won't get dealt with your changes and that kind of fun stuff. Ultimately, it boils down to, at some point, it will actually deploy an ARM template in the background. But I think we should probably start from creating an ARM template, actually, to be honest, Jonathan.
You can't do it all in Terraform? What?
Well, we need to store the state file somewhere, right? So, and the state file should probably sit in a storage account.
Yeah, you see, this is why I've avoided this problem with Terraform by using incremental mode in my CD template, because it just means that the pipeline run looks at it and looks at the ARM template and goes, I'll only change things. There's no plan step. Although new versions of Azure CLI does actually have a what if thing on a resource group that you can do, which we might cover in a future episode. But at the moment, we need to create a storage account which is going to hold shared state, because every time we do a Terraform plan, I believe that state is useful to persist, so that anybody else working on the project can actually refer to that and not have to change things unnecessarily that might not need changing.
So we don't have to do anything special here for a storage account. It's just a standard storage account that we're going to deploy. So I'm going to just use the Azure quick start that there is for it, and we're going to call it state dash backend dot JSON, and we're going to put it into dot Azure deploy dot JSON. Let me just close that. We're going to paste that in. Here we have what will be a storage account. We are defaulting to standard LRS here because we're not too bothered for the purposes of this.
Yeah, to be fair, quite a lot of these would actually switch to defaults if we actually did not specify them, but the outline's at least useful to start with, to know what you could set.
Yeah, precisely. So we've also got things in here like we're setting our storage account name to be TF state and then giving it a unique string based on the resource group ID, because it will ultimately it's going to need a globally unique name, not just in terms of our account but worldwide. And then we have.
What I find useful about that is that it's not like a random number generator. It's actually it is fixed every time. As long as your resource group stays the same name, you'll always get the same hash out of it every time it runs.
Yes, exactly. So what we also have here then is the actual definition of the resource. So we're saying, all right, well, I'm going to use this storage accounts. It's going to take my storage account name, which we have here from our variables. We've got our location, which is set up here to the same to pull out the same location as resource group, which we're going to create as part of our deploy. Anyway, we don't need to create code for this because Azure DevOps can take care of creating it for us. And then we've got our SKU, which we've set. And then the all-important thing that we need inside the storage account is a blob container for these files to sit. And then we've got a output as well. So I'm going to save that.
Have you got the Azure Resource Manager tools extension installed just out of it?
Don't know. Maybe.
That's all right. No worries.
I mean, I think so, on account of it is telling me to do this at the top.
I think you have. It's interesting because it does give you some useful intelligence back.
So where's my terminal? Let's push that back. Let's push that up. We should. You'll see our current iteration of Git Watcher, then update the thing at the bottom of the screen. And of course, as well, if you want to code along at home, I guess, or get involved as well, if you head to the link that should be at the top of the screen now, you'll be able to see our Git Watcher repo and see all these things and open PRs for us as well as we're doing stuff. Again, it's also worth pointing out at this point, because there'll be a build running now, that if you're enjoying what we're doing as well and you want to support what we're doing, please feel free to drop us not just a follow but subscribe here in Twitch, or even cheer bits in the channel. So
and of course,
there's
Git Watcher on screen as well, which is nice.
Yeah, it has. It's which is always nice. So we've got that up. So I wonder if now we want to just go straight into our build and start doing a deploy of this ARM template before we even touch the Terraform. I apologize if you can hear a cat in the background. He's decided to come in.
We can see a cat as well as
yeah, he's just sort of meowing at me. Cool. Okay, so let's just refresh that because I've pushed a new change up. So we're going to add a new stage. So from before, where just to give everybody an overview, we have our trigger for main and then anything under feature. I guess we could do this. In fact, what I will do is when I make this change, is I will create a pull request for it, Jonathan. If Peter yourself want to review it, let's follow a proper process here. So with our zero touch pipeline, our plan is to do everything as code, which means we'll treat all the code that we write, be it infrastructure, be it build and release, be it the product code, is we treat it all with the same scrutiny. So we're going to follow a PR process, make sure that it builds as well. Granted, we are cheating a little bit in that we haven't written any unit tests for this project, which we should probably go back and do at some point. But for the benefit of doing things quickly, we haven't bothered in this instance. It's still also running .NET 3.1, .NET Core 3.1, and in a future episode we'll look at what's involved in upgrading that to .NET 5 as well. So we have our stage and we have some jobs, or a job in there for this stage, but we're going to now add I guess it's going to be a stage for deployment prereqs, maybe. I don't have any preference on naming.
Well, it's just part of, when you say prereqs, I mean, effectively that is part of the deployment process.
Yes.
So it would be just stage to dev, effectively, is the stage. Is it another 2? Can't remember if it's...
I think it's just 2. Well, so we won't need a TF. We won't need this storage account per environment. Though we can put all the state files in the one if we wanted to.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I don't know it well enough, so yeah, that's fine.
I mean, I'm easy with either. So let's do. Well, let's just call it prereq for now and go from there.
Okay.
And then we're adding. Then it's jobs, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. But it's 2 in
yep.
Jobs. Dash job.
Yep.
Yeah. Do we name the job at that point? Yeah, we do.
We can do. Yeah. So this isn't the display name. This has to be unique with no spaces.
Rex. And then we have our tasks ultimately. Steps, sorry, it's called. Is that level with? Sorry for all the scrolling, folks. Just steps. And then we're going to add in a task.
Wouldn't be the scrolling if it wasn't a space-sensitive language.
Yeah. So we're going to do an ARM deployment. We're going to deploy to a resource group, and this is, I would probably want to do it into our subscription. We don't have an Azure Resource Manager subscription connection set up at the moment, so we'll go through that process as well. So we need to authorize that. to say Azure DevOps can deploy to there. So I think, Pete, you're going to have to do this because it's against an AD that you own.
Yeah, this is true.
Do that in project settings, and you can create the connection beforehand.
Yeah,
I will say, while Pete's having a look at that, the one thing that I have found confusing in ARM template language, I don't know if it is just ARM or in general, is that the use of that connection name, and so you give it a name, and you give it a set of privileges through Azure AD to actually do things on your behalf to your subscription. But there are times where you actually make use of that in a task. It might be actually in DevOps infrastructure, and yet it calls it a subscription ID, and yet you're passing the connection name. And the taxonomy doesn't work in my head, because I'm thinking, do I put the GUID in for my subscription? And lo and behold, it's not. It's actually wanting the connection name that you've given specific privileges to, rather than a subscription ID, which is just, I think, is just a slightly confusing. I don't know what it says under the I for information there on the right hand side while we're waiting for this.
For the deployment scope?
No, for the Azure Resource Manager connection.
Oh, yeah. Select the Azure Resource Manager service connection, having access to the selected deployment scope. So nothing really useful.
No. So I tend to find that, actually, we go to my dev. I do find it so much nicer that they've actually shortened the link to this now to be dev.azure.com. It's so much better than the previous names.
Yeah, I think they've deprecated some functionality as well if you're using the old tenant.visualstudio.com stuff. So, yes. Just whilst we're talking through this, I've made you both project admins because I realised I hadn't done that here. So, Pete, you should be able to add the service connection now if you need to.
So I'm in project service connections.
Yeah. So project settings. Oh, hold on. Let me stay there.
Yeah. So we've already got one in there for Azure sponsorship for Azure-ish Live, but I think actually that's for GitHub rather than.
Yeah. So let me go to the
Azure.
same screen.
Is it Azure Resource Manager we want? Azure
is.
Resource Manager. Yep. Cool. Service principal.
Yeah, no, it is there. It is there. And I've created it, and it's all tickety boo.
It does this sometimes, because if you click that authorize button, it says it's failed to do it, but it actually has worked. I've had this in the past where it beefs, and then you actually go and have a look and it's done it. So I don't know if it's just a.
Can you refresh your screen and see what it's doing, or do you dare? You're going to lose what you've just done.
I would lose what I've just done. But it might be that I don't have. So when it creates an SPN in your Azure AD, so you might need to do it.
Let me have a look anyway. Geez. So I'm doing a new Azure service connection and subscription, and I've chosen my subscription, and I've dropped down resource group, and now it's just spinning on loading. I'm not doing anything else.
You want to set that to subscription, the level, I think.
Yeah, that's where I'm on. Scope levels on subscription, and then I've chosen the subscription, but beneath that there's resource group, and
you don't need to set resource group. You can leave that blank.
You'd have thought so, but I can't click save. I might do. Maybe I just need to give it a name.
Give
service connection name.
Oh yes, yeah, you'll need to.
Yeah, that's what it is actually. It's the name that it wants.
Yeah.
Setting up connection. This might take a while as well.
It's usually.
I mean, it is a shame that people can't see what I'm doing here, but it's not hard. There we are. So I've done Git Watcher, but I mean, there is already something
share
there.
For Microsoft Edge. That's what we need next.
Yes.
Yeah. So I do need to refresh the page now, at least. But thankfully, I have hopefully just copied all the bit that I'd done.
Yeah. No.
All those lines. Hours of work.
All that hard work. Okay, so ARM template deployment. We're going to do it to subscription. We're keeping it super simple here. You should probably lock it down further, but for the purpose of this, we're going to go at the subscription level. There's that Git Watcher subscription, even though ARM managed resource connection, and then I still have to pick the subscription. Let's go with UK South.
Funnily enough.
And then we have to link to our artifact. Now, we have our build sources directory that we from before, and that is going to go into our infrastructure, which I have to spell out in my head like that every time. And then what do we call the folder? state backend and then state backend.azure deploy.json. State dash backend slash state dash. Oh no, that's none of those things. Backend Azure deploy.json. We don't need to change any of our template parameters. We already have it. So let's add that straight in, or it could just add it where I've copied and pasted. So let's undo that. It didn't like that, did it? Just tab that in. The end surplus, and we're back to normal. So what we can do here as well is we can put things into variables if we wanted to. I'm going to just do that because I'm going to take this subscription ID out that is just put in for use there. So I'm going to take that out and I'm going to change it to a variable because we don't want to store that data in our source control.
You see, I don't make use of DevOps variables. I use key vault in my ARM template.
We can do, but we don't have key vault set up. So
that's one for another episode.
I can't remember if we can keep this secret or not. I think we can.
Yeah, that means that anytime it's output in logs, it basically just says it's a secret string and it just puts in a double asterisk, I think, or something. So it actually you can't reverse engineer it.
So I'm going to save that there, and I'm going to pop this in there. No, go away. Last pass.
Go away.
No, I don't need to solve that password. Jesus.
Are you sure?
Sure. Yeah.
So I'm going to save this. Going to do a quick.
Yep, I'm waiting.
/Azure pipelines. Start the pull request, which it'll all go and do it because we're also using GitHub. It'll go and just do that in GitHub for us.
I suppose you should wait for the build really before I approve this pull request. I mean, don't know what the heck you might have checked in.
Bitcoin
I wouldn't trust anything I've written.
I've got the queued light next to my commit, waiting for some checks. I suppose that's the build feedback waiting.
Yeah, so I've zoomed in a little bit there. Hopefully it's still relatively clear stream wise. I can't tell from here.
The bottom one is at least saying it's building. This check has started.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's nice.
So we go back to the pipelines, we can see that that's happening. Because ultimately, it's also got PR, it's got our check-in, and they're all running simultaneously actually, because it's counted as 3 separate commits. But we'll give that a moment. So apparently we're also doing a build. I don't know what that is.
Is one maybe the identifier and the other one the display name? I don't know if we specified a display name separate to the identifier.
No, I think we just called them all the same.
It's like New Yorker. Then it's just so good they named it twice.
If I click details, it'll also show us in here what's going on. At least to we're waiting for things to happen, and we can go out to Azure DevOps here as well.
Work out if Gary's comment in the chat where he's saying, I think debug option when running the pipeline manually overrides that setting. I believe he's referring to the secret thing that we were mentioning earlier. But I would have thought that, maybe debug allows you to see secrets, but I would have thought that the whole point of secret is a secret. But
I think there's also a library in here, just for the purposes of this. We go to the library and we can create like secure files. Or we can create variable groups in here and pull those through as well. You can also pull through from Key Vault in here as well, I think. I can't remember exactly.
I've certainly found that while doing this kind of DevOps pipeline that I have relied on the system.debug true variable at the top of my top of my YAML is actually quite useful because it is very verbose about what's happening, and that's especially useful where you don't have access to the build agent that you're running on, especially where you're sharing build agents if you've not run one on premise that you've created a connector to. Oh, I'm not.
So
I'm not
one
going to approve
thing-
this pull request then if it's failing.
Well, yeah, because one thing we haven't done is told it not to run this if
That's true.
we're not coming from master, main even.
But it's saying could not find file matching template file pattern.
So let's go and edit this pipeline to go and fix it. Edit pipeline. What you can also do in here is say, actually, this is the one that I'm editing. So I'm going to add a condition, which I think we can do. Can we do it to the whole job? I think we can, can't we?
Wouldn't it be easier just on the stage to say just that prereqs depends on the previous build rather than keep on it? Because otherwise this condition is just going to be on everything at the moment.
Yeah, but if even if the first one is successful, and then we're coming off of any other branch, it will still try and run this.
True.
I'm assuming it depends on there for this job. So what have we got? Infrastructure, state backend. Because I can't spell, that's the problem. So I'm going to save that.
The other way I've got around this is by if you define environments which can still work with non-Kubernetes or VM deployments, I've put if you put approval steps on the environments, then you can actually cause it to pause without having a depends on. But that's a more manual process. What you're trying to do here is actually make this just zero touch, so that for having a manual approval would be not zero touch. So that condition makes sense.
Yeah. We've also got build policies on to say a PR needs to have a successful build. So that's why we're getting it twice ultimately. But we're still waiting for this to run.
Well, you've done that. The PRs, even though it had failing steps on it, it has auto refreshed without me reloading the page to say that the build is running again. So that's quite handy that you've not had to open a new pull request, and the next build job has automatically attributed itself to that pull request. That's clever.
Now we're also in the queues. Let me just refresh this.
Oh, that's always a great one. Yeah. This is the one thing about cloud resources. Sometimes they're not there. I mean, certainly, I don't know what you found, Pete, at the start of the pandemic last year. It felt like Microsoft were kindly donating quite a lot of cloud resources to the research efforts, and so therefore there was a squeeze on resources for a while.
Yeah. I mean, I sorry to interject. I've come up against that today in work for do you know lab services?
Mm.
So it's at the moment for stuff that's not been used for 30 days, they'll bin it off. As it happens, I've got to run a workshop with some labs tomorrow. And I was just going through, let me just go through my final checks, and none of my VMs are there because I've not used them in over a month.
Yeah.
So, great.
That's interesting. What, your actual Azure resource VMs have been binned?
My lab VMs, yeah.
Oh, okay, that's different, isn't it? Yeah, labs are sort of a unique resource. Yeah, that makes sense. It's something you've got to pay extra for. I was speaking to a Microsoft contractor called Sam Smith, not the singer, towards the start of the pandemic, and he has been, I mean, he's been doing DevOps for years, but he's got his own personal website, but he's got it set to build automatically. I think it was like 8 times a day, build and deploy, and that was just continuous, whether or not there was changes or not. And he was able to view the difference that the pandemic made by how long his builds were taking across all that time. It's really interesting data that he was able to pull out of that. I can't quite remember what he saw now, but he showed me the graphs, and it was quite interesting to see what actually happened there.
Yeah, it is some interesting, like the amount of data that they get out of that stuff is fascinating as well. I've just remembered, by the way, so, well, 2 things. One, that's successful. So, Jonathan, if you'd like to approve that when you get the moment, that'd be great. And the other thing is it wasn't to do with triggers that we need to do at the start of the show. The problem that we have right now is that whatever we push back will trigger our API build. Because what we don't have is a path-based trigger. We're not specifying just only do builds if you detect changes in this given folder, and so on.
I'll try pressing the right button this time.
Well, it's all updated on the screen directly for me as well, which means that now we should have a pipeline that is running. And because we're now coming from main, what we should end up with in a moment is it will run our build, because we want it to make sure we're also building the application and create our artifact as well. It's going to include our infrastructure, and then we'll do our prereqs deployment from there, because we want to keep our product code and our infrastructure code in step with each other.
We click on the prereq step so that we can watch it do its thing.
We can go into the whole.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I certainly found that turning system.debug on was useful when I was having problems with environment variables that I was trying to understand. ARM templates, when they run, you can retrieve the JSON output from that to actually get some unique IDs. So for me, where it was using generating a resource itself, I needed to understand what it had created and the ID. And I found that I was struggling to understand the naming convention, and in the end, it was easier for me to identify what it was doing with system.debug on. But that's something that you wouldn't leave on, because it vastly bloats the logs and includes unnecessary information after you've developed it.
Quite a chunk as well, doesn't it? If I remember rightly.
Super useful though, especially where is normally you want to actually look inside these boxes to understand what's going on in your name. But yeah, it's great to have that confidence. This time always feels like, especially when it is so easy from your local machine to use the Azure CLI tools or press publish, that there seems to be a temptation that you kind of think, well, why do I need to bother with all this boilerplate? But there is something definitely satisfying that, especially if you collaborate with more than one person, it's massively useful to have a repeatable, reliable process to do this stuff with.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly when you're from dev to prod or customer to customer, which I've come up against recently, in fact.
Yeah, and it's interesting with having chatted with Liam offline about Terraform in the sense of some of its modularization benefits and templates. I've done ARM templates where I can reuse build steps myself. Oh, hello, what's going on here?
So he still thinks we can't find the file. Okay, so let's go and edit that. Should make sure that is correct. So build sources directory /infrastructure/state backend. So let's just drop back to the pipeline for a moment, because obviously it's gone through the publish step now. So if I go back into the CI build, I can go to my artifacts in the build, into the drop folder. That'll be why, because we aren't including it. We've missed a step.
Whoops.
Yes, I've had to do this. I've had to do manual publish of stuff I want to use in later to jobs. Yeah. So I make use of the publish task. So instead of actually doing, you can.
There is actually
there's a shorthand for that, which is.
Is there?
Yeah. If I just chat you the shorthand, I mean, it's an alternative for you to look at. It's if you ignore the. So basically, what you can do is, instead of doing task publish build artifact at one, there is a
pipeline resources.
There is just a publish, and then one of its arguments is. It might be one of these. I don't know.
Artifact
until it adds it. Yeah, that's the one. And so that would be the file that you're wanting to push.
So we can do a whole directory, can't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So if I did build sources directory. Sources directory.
And then what you want to call the artifact as you. Yeah, that's it.
And call that infra proc.
Yeah.
Okay. And add that in. Unless I want to do that. Oh, of course.
What I found that I had to do after using that publish task is, obviously that saves it into the job pipeline. I then had to use a download task in the next step, next job, to pull it back out of that store.
Oh, cool. Yes. Okay. So let me go back and do that, because I've also realised that what I just did without thinking was just because we don't have the lock on our main branch at the moment for the three of us at least, as I've just pushed that straight back. So
Okay.
Whoops.
Yeah. So yeah, in the next job, we need to, before we start using that, we need a download step, which is task rather.
Download pipeline artifacts.
That's the one.
Artifact name will be infrastructure.
That's the one. Yeah.
And we're going to pull that into our build sources directory as well.
But that won't exist once we've moved away from the build step, will it? Because we're in a new job.
I think it exists for every job.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
I mean,
Find out.
I tell you what, we can change it to be that and see what happens.
Yeah. So we need to add that step before we move on and indent it because it's got confused.
I am just going to go straight back to main here.
YOLO.
What could possibly go wrong?
It's a live demo. Commit to main, you know. So yeah.
So we got that running. So that failed before. Why did that? Path does not exist.
So S is the sources directory. I had to learn this the hard way of understanding what the /work/1/s was. I was like, what's this? And it's like, oh yeah, that's an alias for.
So infra. No, because I. Just going to push that back with a spelling correction.
I'm trying to find if I can find that. There was a really handy blog post I found that showed you all the common.
There's a There's a Microsoft Docs for it.
Yes, there is, isn't there? I'll have to try and find that and put it in the chat at some point.
Oh, we're gonna have merge conflicts. Oh no, we're okay. So we've got 5 minutes of the show left, and we've not actually got round to writing much Terraform. But hopefully this has still been useful for folks. But we'll be able to pick that up on the next show, and we can probably in the next few minutes still do a very brief boilerplate around it, so that we're on to the next step, ready to go next time.
I think the important bit about this is that these kind of concepts are worth us explaining and going through the hard way, because that's how I learned what all these bits were anyway. So it's a good reminder that the wiring up is something that you do have to learn. It's not. It is a flexible tool, but you have to understand the context and the syntax that you're actually dealing with.
So I don't know, whilst we're waiting, Jonathan or Pete, if you want to go and change the pipeline to only be triggered if certain paths change.
Are you on that, John? Looks like you're on it.
Well, it depends. In GitHub or in Dev?
Either. It's the YAML that needs to change rather than anything else to include that path.
Yeah.
So I think so. Then we're looking at changes to either infrastructure or backend, I guess. Or no, in fact, we don't even need to do infrastructure at the moment because we'll want a path specifically under infrastructure in a bit to cover the API. I'd have thought, but the at least for the backend folder.
Yeah, it's interesting because what I found was that there's a huge amount of help on the Azure documentation about architecture patterns, and one of the things I found in that was some code samples that I found, and I'll try and I can't remember which one it was, but their root of their project space was a folder for application, a folder for pipelines, and a folder for templates. And I actually have found that pattern to be quite useful in the sense that it means that all of my code is under the application folder, all of my YAML pipelines are in the pipelines directory, and all of my ARM templates are in the templates directory, and it actually it's kept my projects a lot cleaner since I've adopted that, and it's just something I'm still playing with at the moment to see if it works.
Yeah, I quite like that. I think it's probably something we want to refactor into ours later. I've just had the same
Oh, we got a bit further though.
problem. So let me just go into here. So we've got our publish pipeline artifact, infrastructure. Yeah. So if I go into just drop back and I go back into here, let's check we actually have that
Hello
artifact.
Oh, there we go.
Infrastructure, state backend. There it is.
Yep.
So let's just go.
Have a look at the prereqs, the actual edit. I was going to say, what was the error message? Did it even show you?
I think from what I remember it saying is it can't find the path.
Right, so it's just balked out without any error message.
Yeah. And our path is pipeline workspace, which we're downloading from pipeline workspace.
Yeah, to that.
So do we? I mean,
so this is why, for the sake of that, it might be worth putting on the system.debug just because you'd see what the download job was doing.
Well, it looks like.
Oh yeah.
Nothing. Well, Chunk's downloaded one.
Yeah, I've had this in the fact that it looks like it's downloaded nothing, but it's just less than 0.1 megabytes, so therefore it looks like it's done nothing, but it has.
Okay. Infrastructure, state backend. Come on, I just want to scroll across. That's all I'm trying to do.
No, I will chase you.
Let's do it this way then.
So pipeline.workspace/infrastructure /state-backend/state-backend.azure deploy.json. Our folder is infrastructure /state-backend/state-backend.azure deploy.json. That's all spelt correctly, isn't it? I'm not.
Right.
Looks like it.
Go back to the web page. Just make sure. Yeah. 50 points for anybody that can spot this typo.
Yeah.
I don't think there
I
is.
think that's still okay.
How did you know to put pipeline workspace at the start there?
Only because we've put that as the target path of the download task above.
Okay.
Well, okay. Well, I'm gonna.
Yeah, stick it back to that. Why not? Yeah, I found as well that what was interesting, Gary's saying, I think the path will include a folder before your source folders. I think it adds an extra folder in the download. Yeah, I think you might be right, Gary.
Yes. Okay, so let's go back to here.
That's why I find system debug easier.
And the infrastructure. That should just kind of be it, because that's where we're pulling it to now. Because it used to do drop. It would be your artifact name.
I at this step, just to get us over this final bit, I would have stuck the system.debug in, but that's just me.
Where are you setting that?
Variables at the top.
So I'm adding variables anywhere here, really.
Yes, it's just. Hang on, let me just double check my pipeline. Yeah, variables : and then it's just system.debug true as the one. So two spaces in, and then system.debug : space true. That's it.
Oh.
So that's
cool.
And now, if you have a look at the build as we go, you should see it being an awful lot more chatty.
Well, let's include all our secrets.
They
shouldn't do, I don't think.
I don't think secrets get. I think it shows more stuff, but it is worth. Oh, we've got an agent and everything.
Oh. Agent Smith.
Whilst we're kind of waiting, what just happened?
I don't know. It refreshed and collapsed your.
Oh, okay.
0.8.
Yeah. So whilst we're waiting for this, Pete, do you want to talk, because we're coming to the end of today's lunchtime show at least, do you want to talk about your show that's happening this evening?
Yes, yeah, we've got a brand new IoT show called IoT Live, and that's TEA, as in a cup of tea, because we're British. And myself and Cliff Aegis are tonight, we're just going to chat through a bunch of stuff that we've done recently, including a Raspberry Pi Pico Stream Deck type knockoff that I've made. I'm still making, in fact, and also how to deploy Uno platform apps to the Raspberry Pi. I've made a script that lets you do that. And we'll also talk about a Raspberry Pi robot as well. I know I've had mine up and running for a while, as has Johnny Chips in the chat down there. But Cliff is now getting his up and running, and I think he's bought all the kit, and he's even redesigned the 3D printed robot arm to make it simpler. So Cliff's going to talk about his journey doing that as well.
We're doing a talk on that on Monday, aren't we?
Indeed. Yeah, on the 12th. Is it the 12th?
15th.
15th, in fact.
12th is Friday.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, 15th. Yeah. We've got lots to do between now and the 15th, actually, to do that talk. And then on Thursday, myself, Cliff, and Benjamin Carbe from the Microsoft IoT team are starting a set of streams every Thursday, 2 p.m. GMT. Actually, tonight is 9 p.m. GMT, but Thursday is 2 p.m. GMT on this channel. We're going to be hooking up these LoRaWAN gateways and sensors. The gateway's plugged in down there, but we're going to hook that up to our own Azure infrastructure. So Benjamin's already done all of this, and so we're going to run through that live. So that should be quite cool. So yeah, tonight at 9 p.m. GMT and Thursday at 2 p.m. GMT.
That should be good. Obviously, we'll tweet out all the info for it, and like Pete said, you'll be able to get to that here on this channel, and we'll export it all out to YouTube afterwards, so you can catch it on demand at any time. So this has put things places.
Is there no error below that job? I know that the overall pipeline runs is balking about an error, but do we actually get to see where the error is spat out from the prereq step?
Yeah, it's just catching up now.
Because if we can see where the error is, I'm hoping it would at least show us. Is that still running? Yeah, it's still acquiring an agent, isn't it? Okay, so it's not gone wrong just yet. Yeah, Pete, if you ever run out of ideas, and I don't think you're going to run out of ideas for your show, you could get your robot arm to make you a cup of tea, and then that is IoT.
Yep. Funnily enough, Olivier Bloch, who's the PM, the community PM over at on Azure IoT, suggested that exact same thing. In fact, he wanted coffee rather than tea, but he's American rather than British.
Gary says if it's Yorkshire tea, he's going to be there.
Yeah. It can be any flavour of tea you like. It'll be Earl Grey here, I'm afraid, but not because I'm posh, just because I like it.
So that's still stuck at acquiring agent.
Oh, come on. Let's get a cloud result.
Yeah.
I think that's the one that's an interesting side effect of cloud, is that you have to assume that at some point the cloud's going to say no. So,
are you beeping, John? Jonathan, are you beeping?
Am I beeping? I don't know.
Something's beeping. Or is it you, Liam?
No, there's nothing in my house beeps, I don't think.
It's my fridge.
It's your fridge beeping.
It's telling you it's time to eat.
Come on. Don't tell me there's some form of Azure DevOps issue now.
Oh, it will be. Yeah, without a doubt. But all of this is doing is telling us what the problem is. It's still not going to work because we've got the same problem.
We did also change the path.
Ah, you're right, we did. So it may work.
It might, but if it's just going to sit there twiddling its thumbs.
No, it'll be tomorrow at some point.
Oh, this is
on next week's show. See how the prereqs.
SKU position information is unavailable.
This is like the perfect cliffhanger at the end of any operation that we should, any drama, we should just leave them hanging.
Well, yeah, I think maybe what we do then is for now is we probably end it there because obviously we are doing this as our lunchtime is part of our working days, and we do have hang on.
You see?
It's just a warning.
No, I think it's getting. No. Oh, yeah. There it is.
There we go.
Live.
Yeah. Okay. I knew you were going to finish it. Yeah.
Right, here we go.
So that's downloaded.
What it was is, it was because I went and had a look on mine, you see, it sped it up.
The template resource location at line 1368 is invalid. The template function resource group is not expected at this location.
Oh,
That's all caps resource group.
Yes. Is there something wrong with the task?
obviously.
Because if we go back into our edit pipeline, we don't.
No. Go back to the error just in case, because earlier.
Oh, hold on. Wait.
Oh,
You know what we're missing?
What's that? Oh, hello.
Subscription
Yeah,
ID.
Of course.
We don't tell it where it's going.
Because we had problems with the connection earlier. Yeah, okay. We'll have to come back and wire that up next time.
Yeah, we will do. Cool. Okay, so folks, unfortunately, it didn't quite work. We didn't get quite as far as we wanted to today. I'm just looking at another example that I've got to hand for that deploy actually at the same time, because we could just do. I'm just going to quickly do this because I'm literally right there. I don't know why it's not on the thing on the side. I'm going to call this TF, AZL dash TF state shared UKS dash RG. But that should solve that problem, which is really strange. So next time, I'm just going to leave that to run for a minute. And hopefully while I'm waffling, it'll do. So we'll pick up on next show, which will be in 2 weeks' time, which will be the 20-something. I know that much. The 23rd, in fact, of February. And what we'll do is we'll start then building up the Terraform itself. So now we've got the state set up. Or we should have shortly, we'll be good to go next time. So thank you folks very much for watching. I hope it was useful. I hope you will learn something in that. Even for the simplest things, they can take a long time to get those sorted. But please tune in to the premiere of IoT Live this evening on twitch.tv/Azurish Live. And it'll be available on YouTube afterwards. And then tomorrow we also have Azurish After Dark, where we'll be sitting down to sit with Chris Reddington from Microsoft to have a chat around Microsoft and Azure and play some Among Us as well. And that'll be live from 8 p.m. on Twitch too. We've also got a jam-packed week full of other stuff to come. So keep an eye out on our Twitter, which is just @Azurish Live. And we'll see you again next time.
Bye.
Oh, hang on. We will do in a minute. Hang on. Nothing's working again.
This afternoon, live coding with Liam all afternoon.
I got distracted by the fact that the thing is now just saying no message found for this issue. So that's good. Good. But cheers, folks. Speak to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.